Without any further ado, you all are here to hear Representative Matt Shea describe all about the 51st state. Afterwards, we're going to have a brief Q&A period, so please hold all of your questions until after he is done speaking. And if you would all please give a very warm welcome to the man in charge of this whole effort, Representative Matt Shea.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, I want to start with a video today, if we could. Let's see if this comes up actually over there.
Hey, side, it's Seattle. We don't have enough liberal politicians.
Do Seattle a solid. Send Monka Dingra to the Senate.
Monka Dingra will give us free stuff. I love free stuff.
Who cares about higher card tab fees? The cars.
Higher taxes, bigger government? Oh yeah.
Monka Dingra is Seattle sophisticated, not like those East Side soccer moms.
Seattle loves Monka Dingra.
She's on our side.
She's one of us.
Do it for Seattle and send Monka Dingra to the state senate.
All right, now that is a parody video, but I think captures the distinct difference from downtown Seattle and Eastern Washington. Can I get an amen to that? Yeah. All right, I want to bring up next. Hang on a minute.
I've lived in Redmond for over 20 years. My husband and I bought our first house in Redmond.
Okay, so I want to bring up the slideshow now, and I want to start with something that I think is absolutely critical to understand. We have a lot of people out there that have a lot of differing views on what a 51st state should look like, and very candidly, I don't care if it's a 51st state or we're the 53rd. I really don't care, as long as we're free. As long as we're free. Now, some people say, well, Matt, why do you say it that way? Well, because there are some dramatic differences between downtown Seattle and Eastern Washington. And one of those dramatic differences is that over here, many of us believe that our hope is not in man, but in Jesus Christ. Amen? Amen. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be atheists in the state of liberty. Of course there can. But it doesn't change the fact that our country and our state were founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Now, there's been a lot of argument and debate over that over the years, but the Bible was the #1 source cited by the Founding Fathers. That's a historic fact. But I don't want to talk about the Founding Fathers today. I actually want to go to China. Okay? Let's go to China for a second. There was a book written called Jesus in Beijing by David Aikman. He was an author. He went over there. And in 2002, from the Chinese premier academic research institute, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing, they gave a presentation to 18 American tourists. And one of those tourists was David Aikman. And here is what that academic, okay, this is the atheist communist Chinese, okay, said about the United States when they studied what made America great. Quote, "We studied everything from the historical, political, economic, and cultural perspective. At first we thought it was because you had more powerful guns than we had. Then we thought it was because you had the best political system. Next we focused on your economic system. But in the past 20 years, we have realized that the heart of your culture is your religion, Christianity. That is why the West has been so powerful. The Christian moral foundation of social and cultural life was what made possible the emergence of capitalism and then the successful transition to democratic politics. We don't have any doubt about this." That's the atheist communist Chinese, so there you go. So there's really no more debate about this. I want to say before we start, I would appreciate it if nobody took pictures of the slide presentation other than the official videos that we're doing. We're going to make this into an educational video, so I'd appreciate it if you would respect that. Let's talk about it. Judeo-Christian Foundation, I just talked about Jesus in Beijing. I also want to talk about separation of church and state. Now, that has been twisted today. In the current Constitution of Washington State, there's actually Article 1, Section 11, an absolute freedom of conscience in all matters of religious sentiment. Is that happening in Washington State today? No. Just ask the photographer or the florist or the baker. Interestingly enough, though, nobody reads the state constitution, and in Article 26, it's even clearer. There shall be perfect toleration of religious sentiment, quote unquote. In fact, Article 26 is the only irrevocable part of our state constitution. You think that's being followed today? No, it's not. And so it kind of brings us to the question of what Mark Hurd talked about earlier. Who is government? Who is government? And what Mark said is really the truth. Government isn't a who. It's an it. It's like a car. It's a tool. What matters is the people driving the car, the governing. And if we look at a lot of what's happening in the current state of Washington, the governing are not reflecting the values, traditions, belief, and heritage of Eastern Washington. It's just not happening. Now, I've had some people say, well, we need to trust government. We need to trust the governing, you mean? Well, okay, we need to trust them too. And after I broke the national news story on the memo from Larry Wooten in the Bundy case here a few weeks ago, I don't think that we should trust government or the governing again. We should ask the hard questions. We should not say that that's just some paranoia, because when you have a memo from the lead investigator in the Bundy case from the Bureau of Land Management say that there was an alleged kill book where they bragged about driving 3 people to suicide, where there was alleged sexual misconduct, where they withheld exculpatory evidence, which, by the way, is a crime. And then they admitted that, yes, indeed, there were snipers down at the Bundy Ranch pointed at innocent American citizens. I got to tell you something. A sniper rifle is not due process, not in any day, and it should never be in America or even in this state, ever. So we need to, I think, take a look at how we view freedom today. I've heard a lot from the left, and I'm going to go through some things, but I've heard a lot from the left that we shouldn't even have a voice anymore. How is that freedom? You know what? I could disagree with you, but as long as you're not being disruptive and you're allowing all the views to come out, I will fight and die to protect that. And that's the way we should all be. So, who is going to solve this problem that we have right now? It's going to be us. This is about people. It's going to be us. It is going to be us. It's going to be us with mutual respect and submission and discussion. There were vast and differing views at the founding of America, and even the founding of Washington State. I'm going to get into a little bit of what those were, but we can still respect each other if we're driving toward the same goal of liberty and freedom. I also want to say that I don't believe that America, or Washington State for that matter, can be pointed in the right direction if God is not at the center of our lives so He can be at the center of our country and our state. Amen. So what are some reasons? And these are just a few, okay? There are many, okay? These are just a few. I believe that some of these, a lack of respect for traditional morality, a lack of respect for all human life, including in the womb. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that people try to say that all of a sudden you become a human because you pass 6 inches across the birth canal. That's ridiculous. And I got to tell you something about that too. If arbitrarily you can decide where along that line life begins, then no life is truly protected. A right of conscience we've already talked about, but what about a right of property? How many of you know a rancher that's having to deal with stubble height, or maybe wolves, or maybe the Department of Ecology? And you can feel free to boo if you want to on that one. How about the right to bear arms? Is that under attack in our state right now? How about high taxes? So let's talk about a few of these things. So just currently this year, here are some reasons. You've got an income tax, a sugar tax, a carbon tax, a property tax increase. So picture yourself for a second at the gas pump, where the carbon tax would increase your gallon of gas by 20 cents. Sipping on a soda, which they want to tax at 24 cents a can. Reading your property tax statement, which is going to go up a few $100s. And imagine a vacuum cleaner in your back pocket, because that's the way it is. That doesn't reflect our values in Eastern Washington. And these things come up year after year after year. Despite the fact the Supreme Court has said an income tax is unconstitutional in Washington State, it keeps coming up because they say, we don't care. We don't care. Well, we care. I care. Then you have the Hearst issue with water. And by the grace of God and some great work, including by Representative Dave Taylor, we were able to fix the Hearst decision and preserve water rights for the next generation here in Washington State. Representative Taylor stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives and he said this: if you think that you are going to meter our wells in Eastern Washington, you better prepare for a war. Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, right? Then you have the right to bear arms. So they want to, I just blows my mind the lack of reality in downtown Seattle. But I digress. A magazine ban, right? A high-capacity magazine ban they introduced. They want to push that forward this year. The so-called assault weapon ban. And you've got also House Bill 2738 that was introduced this last week that would effectively ban concealed carry everywhere in the state of Washington. You would have to ask permission, express permission, of every private property owner where you go to carry concealed. Could you imagine basically carrying around a binder and then carrying concealed? And that's what they're talking. That's ridiculous. It doesn't reflect our values. So-called safe storage, where they want to prosecute people after the fact if your safe gets broken into. Here's the bottom line with this. One more bureaucrat is not going to stop bad people. One more permit or stack of permits is not going to stop bad people. One more gun-free zone is not going to stop bad people. One more law is not going to stop bad people. It is armed, trained, good people that stop armed bad people every time. That's the way it always has been, and that is the way it always will be. Property taxes. Property, what is property? Do we know anymore? 1878, the first state constitution, there's a big argument there too, and I get it, and here's one of the reasons why. In 1878, Article 5, Section 23 of the state constitution said this, quote, all lands within the state are declared to be alloidial, and feudal tenures with all their incidents are prohibited. Does anybody know what a alloidial title is? You can never lose it to a property tax foreclosure, to liens, to anything, unless you sign it away. Now, how many of you actually knew that that system was preserved in the 1889 Constitution later, not in the Constitution, but in statute under something called the Torrens system? How many of you ever even heard of that? It exists in Washington State, and guess what? They're trying to get rid of it this year. They're trying to abolish it this year for modernization purposes. But I called them on it. And it was mainly West Coast, West Side counties that were trying to abolish this. And I said, wait a minute. We don't need to abolish this. We need to make the system easier for people to get their title registered in the Torrens system so we have property rights in Washington State again. But that shows you the difference in worldview. Then last, on education. If you want to homeschool, if you want to send your kids to private school, if you want to go to public school, that's great. But you should have the choice to do it, and you should be able to keep your money to pay for it. And that is something that would be different in a state of liberty. So as I've said on my radio show a couple of times, an emerald curtain has descended around downtown Seattle, and it's time we pull back the curtain and reveal the wizard behind it. Let's talk about what we're facing. I'm going to be very blunt today, as many of you know. We face a communist threat. Now, people say, you can't say communist today. You can't say it. Well, these are actual communists, and they say they're communists on their websites and their Facebook posts, so okay. But here, let me just prove it to you. Antifa, everybody's heard of them? Do those flags look similar? Does that symbol look similar? I'd say that's probably conclusive proof right there alone. Okay? But if that doesn't prove it for you, I'm going to show you the octopus. Now, you in the back probably can't read those. This is the network of socialist organizations in downtown Spokane, in our own backyard. Wow. Who knew? Who knew? And here's the interesting part about that. Some of these people actually advocate violence. But wait, I thought they were for peace, as the Peace Justice Action League of Spokane says. And yet they advocate treating other countries and some of our allies and some people in America as if they were third world citizens or third class citizens. But if you don't believe me, this is from their own book called The Deep Green Resistance. Their own playbook. And you'll see down in the lower right-hand corner, for those of you in the back that can't see it, it says violence against humans, direct confrontation and conflict as part of their taxonomy of action. This is from their own playbook. This isn't me. So every time that people get accused when you stand up on a stage like this, defending the freedoms of Americans, defending the Constitution of the United States, defending the state of Washington's Constitution, and if those documents mean what they say, that's not violent. That's American. This is violent. Second, Soviet Islam. Only a coalition of Islamists and Marxists can destroy the United States of America. For those of you old enough to remember Carlos the Jackal, that is his quote. But if that isn't enough, the highest-ranking KGB defector to the United States of America, General Mihai Pachipa, says it even plainer. Before 1969 came to an end, Palestinian terrorists trained at the KGB's Balashika Special Operations School east of Moscow had hijacked their first El Al plane and landed it in Algeria, etc. It's interesting that General Pachipa's book, Disinformation, talks about the communist infiltration of the left in the United States of America very plainly, and yet it's as if it doesn't exist. Folks, it does exist, and that's one of the things we're facing. But if that doesn't convince you, how about this? The New York Times had a best-selling author who broke this story that most of you probably did not hear about because it didn't get a lot of play in the mainstream media. But it talks about how they had the FBI investigate, literally investigate, an American leftist organization that went to Germany to consult with Al-Qaeda. How many of you heard that in the media? But if that's not enough, in the mid-2000s in Virginia, there was a man named Ibrahim El-Brasi who was arrested in Virginia filming the superstructure of a bridge. When the FBI raided his house in a secret sub-basement, they found the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in America. And in that archive, they found something that's come to be known as the explanatory memorandum. And out of this arrest came something called the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terror financing trial in U.S. history. And part of that whole financing trial, they introduced that explanatory memorandum as evidence and said, "Judge, rule on this." And so the judge did, ruled as a matter of fact and law. This list of organizations I'm about to show you were unindicted co-conspirators as members of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. One of those organizations was the North American Islamic Trust. And this is actually from the court document. This is a primary source. You'll see North American Islamic Trust. Who owns the mosque in Spokane Valley, Washington? The North American Islamic Trust. As a matter of fact and law, the Muslim Brotherhood owns the mosque in Spokane Valley, Washington. That does not reflect my values, and I don't believe it reflects the values of most Americans. And I also don't believe that Sharia law is compatible with the Constitution of the United States. That is a big difference from what folks in downtown Seattle believe. It got even more interesting when in that same trial they listed the Council of American Islamic Relations. One of the foremost spokes organizations for the Islamic movement in the United States of America. And then you have some of the things that have been occurring recently. As a state, I think we should take very seriously attacks on our infrastructure, particularly our cyber infrastructure, and you will see that the number of breaches that occur, business is by far number one, government is number two. But here's the interesting part about that. The actual number of records that are breached, you'll see on the right side here, that big tall line, that's government. The actual number of records that are breached are from government. What are those records? Well, I'm glad you asked. Your name, your social security number, your financial and banking information, your medical information. Why would they want people's medical information? Why? Why would a foreign government want your medical information? Right, to exploit. So, I believe this is another thing we need to take seriously, and this would be taken seriously in a state of liberty. But if that doesn't convince you, perhaps this will. Washington State right now actually supplies power to 11 other states. We should take it very seriously, our power grid. And yet, Wired Magazine talked about the hack over the summer where foreign government, we don't know exactly whom, got control of our grid to the point they could turn the lights off or on. That's a fact. It happened. Then you had later a little bit about North Korea. Why do I bring this up? Because I've talked to people in downtown Seattle and they don't believe it's a true threat. I do. I also believe it's a true threat to prepare for our power grid failing. Now, some people say an EMP is not going to be a threat. And yet, the Russians, in Project K, actually launched EMPs over Kazakhstan. This is back in the 60s. And out of that, their power grid went down. The Russians know how power grids are going to go down. And it's interesting, too, when I studied communist doctrine when I was inside the United States military and the Army for years, they believed that they weren't going to launch nuclear weapons against the United States in World War III. They would not do it. They would actually launch an EMP. That's what the Russians believed, because they knew what would happen. So I bring this up because on the left, you'll see our grid before modernization at the top, and then after modernization at the bottom. We got a lot more computers, we got a lot more vulnerable infrastructure. Now, most of the power generation is where in this state? In eastern Washington, right? The New America Foundation, that's interesting. Right-wing extremists are more dangerous Islamic terrorists in the United States of America. I'm frankly tired of being called extremist because I believe the Constitution means what it says, because I believe in the right to bear arms, because I believe life starts at conception, because I believe that we all should own our own property, because I believe the government doesn't have any hand in our water rights, because I believe the government should mind its own darn business most of the time, and instead its purpose should be to protect our rights, not to take them away. So who funds the New America Foundation? You get a packet of M&Ms if you answer right. Hey, well, how many packets of M&Ms is that going to be? George Soros, of course! Do you think there's an agenda here? Come on! Of course there is. So are we already two different states? I would say we are already two different states. And I'm going to go through a series of maps to prove this to you. I believe we're morally different, we're politically different, we're different on the issues that I just talked about, and we're different on economics. So first, politically different. There is the map for the vote of the presidents of the United States of America. Now, you'll see one blue county, Whitman. What's in Whitman County? Perfect, the college, okay? How about, what's the political voting for Congress? Wow. How about the voting for governor? Wow. How about the voting for the state legislature? You see that tiny little blue dot in eastern Washington? That's downtown Spokane. We'll convert our brothers and sisters down there just yet, you watch. Okay, but I mean, look at that. Nothing can be more stark. We're politically different in our courts as well. Here's the interesting part about it. The red, okay, the red that you see up on this screen, those are judges that were picked by Republican presidents. The white are vacancies. You'll see the most vacancies are in Western Washington. The blue are judges that were chosen by Democrat presidents. Eastern Washington, all our judges were appointed by Democrat presidents. That doesn't reflect our values, traditions, culture, beliefs, etc. How about morally different? Here is the vote on registered domestic partners. Wow. You'll see our brothers in Southwest Washington are with us too. Here's for same-sex marriage. Again, Whitman County standing out glaringly. By the way, Skamania down there in Southwest Washington, they've been calling me and emailing me all the time saying, add us to the state. Please, don't leave us. I bring this up for a reason. People say, what's wrong in America today? Well, this is one of the reasons. Single-parent households are in the red. You can see there. When households have both parents, it makes a huge difference, and I think we all know that. I think we all know that. Difference on life. This right here is a very clear picture of how much it costs for each baby part sold on the open market. Now, did you know that there is a freezer / refrigerator, I guess, at the University of Washington with baby parts in it? Did you know that? I submit to you that does not reflect our values, cultures, traditions, beliefs here in Eastern Washington. And here is the Seattle Times article talking about that University of Washington lab. I would submit to you that we are different on the issue of liberty. There is the statue of Lenin with the red hand, with marking blood, as the communists have spilled so much over the history of the world. And then you have the cross above Colville. Pretty stark comparison, is it not? This is the mesh network in downtown Seattle. And you'll see all these databases on the right. You'll see a police vehicle in the upper left-hand corner. I put this up here to show that this is the type of surveillance state that they want downtown Seattle. And I say, great, you can have that in downtown Seattle. Don't try that in Eastern Washington. Property rights. We talked about Hearst, but I want to talk real quick about wolves. This is from Conservation Northwest's website. Okay? Just read a couple of these things on here. Washington can be the state where wolf recovery, conservation, and management works in the long run for people, wolves, and all the Northwest wildlife. Okay? Well, that's great, except that there are no wolves in Western Washington. Perhaps we should relocate some there, huh? I don't know. So how can they in downtown Seattle know what's best for Eastern Washington? You can't. Come on. This is another interesting one on forest management. It's a little hard to see for those of you in the back, so I'll move to the next. But the one on forest management essentially shows where there was an intentional burn and intentional thinning of the fuel load in the forest. When a forest fire swept through it, the forest was still good. Where the fuel load was left, the forest was destroyed. And here, I want to talk in language that the greenies can understand, okay? 92 million tons of CO2 is generated by Washington State per year. 24 million tons of that CO2 is from catastrophic wildfires. And that was 3 years ago. So look, Matt Shea is the greatest environmentalist that has ever lived in Washington State, because I believe we can reduce CO2 by almost a quarter, maybe a third even, if we just manage our forests better. Amen. I talked a little bit about self-defense, but I want to show you the map actually on this. I-594 regarding the so-called background checks, which is totally unworkable. You'll see that we mostly voted against it. But you'll also notice, and I still don't know what happened down in Soka County. Somebody knows somebody down there. Can you ask them for me? Because I still haven't figured that one out. But most of Eastern Washington voted to protect the right to bear arms. I believe we have a different view on education. You will see the line through the middle there. This is from Cato Institute. That is the cost of education, the amount of money spent on education. And you will see at the bottom the results of tests. No correlation. I submit we can educate our kids better if we have choice. I just submitted. Now, this is from the Department of Revenue's website, so you have to forgive the map colors because they really don't contrast really well. I didn't create it, but the highest tax areas in Washington State for sales tax are right around downtown Seattle, King, Pierce, and you'll see that the lowest is in Eastern Washington. We're already 2 states. If you go next to property taxes, again, it's kind of poor highlighting, but you'll see that the higher property taxes are in Western Washington, the lower property taxes are in Eastern Washington. We're already 2 states. I believe we're economically different. This was a vote on labor standards, and you'll see that Eastern Washington voted completely against it. I would also submit to you that if we start cleaning our forests up, we start allowing freedom again, suddenly we're going to have a lot of jobs back in rural Washington. Now, this is an interesting statistic. This is probably one of the best slides on here to show where we were headed. And even under Trump, it's gone down because more males aged 25 to 54 have been employed. But the reason I put this up is when you have the unemployment rate, or the percentage rate of unemployed males get above 10%, what you have is civil unrest. Okay? And so jobs, freedom, bring not just prosperity, they bring what Mark Kerr was talking about, stability. So is splitting realistic? Again, it's already happening in fact. I want to talk about what has come to be known as the American Readout, but it's actually not a new idea. It's actually a really old idea. This is a map from 1860, and it shows Washington and Idaho essentially connected. Today, it's actually mapped out like this. But where in the United States of America is most free? Now, the maps I'm about to show you hold true if you split Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon. Every map I'm showing you holds true. The American Readout. This is according to the Cato Institute. Where is the most debt-free in the country? Wow, look at that. This is long-run solvency according to Mercatus Center. This is a nationally recognized center. Long-run solvency, this area of the country. Where is the lowest credit risk for cities? All the ones you see on there, and this comes to us from Zero Hedge, all the ones you see on there are credit risk cities. Where is the least amount of credit risk cities? This area of the country. What is a credit risk city? That's a city that's at risk of going bankrupt. Where has the least public pension funding liabilities? This area of the country. We are already separating based on our ideology, based on our actions. Where are pensions most funded? Well, our area of the country and then a little bit into Appalachia. God bless those guys. Where has the lowest income taxes? Well, the states that you see in gray, those are states without income tax. It's our area of the country. We have kind of an idea that the fruits of your labor should be kept. And that should be that way in the state of Liberty. How about the lowest sales taxes? You'll see two states there that are gray. That's low sales taxes, but it's our area of the country and again part of the Appalachians. How about property taxes? Again, our area of the country and down into the Appalachians. This is from the Tax Foundation, a couple of these I've just been going over. How about business taxes? The blue states are actually the best business climates in the country. And you'll notice they're congregated around us, and Idaho's not one of the top 10. How about cost of living? Again, our area of the country is the best, and then into the Appalachians. Now, the next slide is my favorite slide of this entire presentation. And the reason I use slides is because these are primary source documents. We can't argue these. But the next slide gets at this, we're just a bunch of hicks and rednecks over here in Eastern Washington. You guys don't know what you're talking about over there. And you guys are just a bunch of unread, uneducated hillbillies. Okay? Except that we're not, because they actually track the most intelligent literacy rates in the country, and it's our area of the country. So eat your heart out, downtown Seattle. Us rednecks and hillbillies are pretty darn smart, and we're pretty well read. But what does this show right here? It shows that our beliefs are not just based on emotion, they're based on fact and investigation. And the next slide is also very good. We actually believed in freedom so much, we gave women the right to vote before we were a state. And so did our area of the country. This is an interesting slide. What part of the country has the least number of mosques? Wow. What has the least number of sanctuary cities? Now, it's interesting. They actually, on a DOJ website, they actually listed Spokane Valley as a sanctuary city, but they actually passed a resolution that they weren't a sanctuary city. But they messed that up, so I want to be clear that it holds true in Eastern Washington. Where are drones used the least? For everything from law enforcement uses to, and this is particularly horrible in my opinion, regulatory use. Right now, in Washington State, and I actually sat across from the governor, he wants to use drones, he told us this, to our face, wants to use drones to fly over private property to see if there are any violations. I want you to imagine that on your ranch, or your farm, okay, for a second. I don't believe that that's consistent with liberty. Where are the least number of communist groups in the United States? I want to thank Indivisible for this, because they put it together. Appreciate that. It's our area of the country, but we still have some here. So if the power grid did go down, where would it affect the country the most? Well, part of Eastern Washington, because of all that power generation. But I think we can fix that and shrink that map down a little bit. Now, I always like to see what kind of my ideological enemies say about us, and here's one of them. All right, this is a state grades on gun laws from USA Today, right? So an F, I think, is probably where you're supposed to be. So, all right. This is from a Russian professor who used to work for Izvestia, the disinformation arm of the KGB. what he thought America, how he thought it would split up kind of ideologically, and it's along political boundaries. But again, he identified that this area of the country was distinct. Now, David Aikman, who I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, also wrote a book called When the Almond Tree Blossoms, and in that book, he broke it up with a map of where ideologically we're different in the United States. It's interesting, in that book, he wrote in 1992, he predicted civil unrest in the United States would begin in a place called St. Louis, Missouri. 1992. But he used the word constitutionalist, or people that love the Constitution and believe it means what it says, to describe that area of the country. All right, 51st state. That's officially the map that was introduced, okay? This is the ideological map. These are the counties that are included, and again, Scamania has been yelling at me to try to make them included on here. But it's 20 counties. Some people have said, but Matt, this is a fool's errand. It's not popular. Well, it was interesting because when we first introduced this, KXLY actually did kind of this online survey about it, okay? And that online survey was going so well for us that they took it down, okay? Because 73% of the people said, yeah, we're supporting this. We did another survey after that, private survey of 1,500 people, and it was 75%. So, whatever, 73, 74%. An overwhelming majority. By the way, that would cross party lines demographically. Want a new state. Is it constitutional? Yes, Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, to go directly to your question earlier, is how you split a state. A simple majority vote of the state legislature and then of Congress to split the state. I think we would have the votes at the national level right now, and I think we're very close to having the votes at the state level based on some of the conversations I've had privately with other legislators. Is this a new idea? No. Kentucky was created out of Virginia, Massachusetts, and Maine. You have West Virginia, Vermont. Now you've got all of these. Everybody's jumping on board now. Did you see the one for California the other day? Yeah, everybody did, right? So then there's my great friends in Northern California in the state of Jefferson who have been doing this for a long time. And they said, listen, Matt, promise us one thing. If y'all go first, take us with you. Okay? And if we go first, we'll take it with us. That's what they said. But this is really not just isolated to America. This idea of splitting and preserving your values, beliefs, heritage, culture, traditions, the things that make America great, and preserving them for the next generation, it's not just new to America or isolated to America. It actually is all over the world. This is an autonomous movement map from Europe. Dozens and dozens of movements. And most people, they kind of know about Ireland and maybe Spain, but I mean, look at it, it's all over the place. Would we be able to function as a new state? Now, some people say no. They say we're a bunch of welfare freeloaders, that's their term, not mine, a bunch of welfare freeloaders over here in Eastern Washington, and that we take more money than we raise in taxes. This actually came from the stranger, although that's not exactly true. Eastern Washington has roughly the same size population as Idaho. We have roughly the same amount of total comparable income. Now you understand, Idaho has an income tax, we don't, but we have higher sales and gas taxes, okay? So you gotta compare apples to apples. We would function just fine. We have more than enough tax revenue to function in this state. And I gotta tell you something, this is presuming we would have the exact same tax structure and the exact same size of government on this side of the mountains. I don't want that, do you? No. All right. So we're not going to have the same size of government. It will be a lot less. One of my friends said, well, you guys would close all the state parks and you don't have that many in Eastern Washington anyways. So I put this map up here for him. We do. We wouldn't close. I love them. Most people do. Then you've got the way that the mainstream media portrays us. Crosscut particularly, busting the myth of two Washingtons, right? It's interesting because they always result in name calling, okay? Quote, the idea that our differences of lifestyle, culture, and values seems to be coded dog whistling and born of ignorance. So let me just say this. If we're, again, such a bunch of ignorant redneck hillbillies over here in Eastern Washington, we are so sorry for being such a burden for so long, just let us go. And she said, I didn't call you ignorant, and I sent that back to her screenshot. I said, you called us hicks too, and she said, no, I didn't, and there it is, so that's why I put it up there, all right? Then you had back the Columbian, quoted the Socialist Review in December 11, 2016. It said, splitting Washington into two states, it's folly, it's stupid, we should never do that. Only in 1984, they had a 96-page insert in the Spokesman Review that actually supported it. So where do you actually stand, Socialist Review? They actually hate that I have that. A bunch of people must have kept it. I got 2 or 3 copies. That was great. 4 copies. Look it. I just appreciate if you're going to be honest. And this guy from The Stranger was honest. Why not just cut the rubes loose? Okay, fine. Let us wallow, and I'll get to that here in a second, in our poverty, all right, over here in Eastern Washington. Okay, let's talk about taxes. Here's the tax structure currently in the state of Washington. Sales and use accounts for 89 or 79% of the taxes, and you'll see that property taxes is about 9%, okay? Imagine a state that didn't have property taxes. Do you think we can find 9% savings in a budget? Yeah. I think so. But imagine a state that didn't have property taxes. Imagine that for a second. Here is our spending. This is 2014. It was the newest I could get from a graph, okay? So this is 2014. That's the caveat. Spending has actually increased by a ton since then, okay? But it's actually increased more for education to bring it up to 52%. But you see that most of it is education, and you'll see Medicaid and public assistance as well, okay? You'll also see that Washington, according to non-biased objective observers, is ranked 50th in minimum wage laws. 50th is bad, okay? 50th in right to work, 50th in telecommunications regulations, and then on land use, 44th. I say we get rid of property taxes, we have a loyal title again. You can let us wallow in the poverty of being first in production of apples, Concord grapes, red raspberries, pears, sweet cherries, hops. Second, potatoes, wine, onions, edible peas, apricots. Poverty here in Eastern Washington. All right, 8 steps to freedom. First of all, representatives in government should best reflect the values, traditions, heritage, beliefs, and cultures of a people. That's the fundamental issue. Today, what we're doing is helping to create a groundswell. Take that 73% that believes in this, get them off the couch and get them involved. Now again, if you haven't gone to patriotpolls.org and voted, vote. Get your friends and family to do it. Only vote once, like I said before, okay? We also need, I believe, to have our counties, like they have done in Northern California, to sign resolutions supporting the 51st state movement. So our county commissioners can do those resolutions. I think it needs to start as soon as possible. We have already introduced House Joint Memorial 4000 to Congress to ask them to vote on splitting the state of Washington. We will be introducing a House bill also to split the state of Washington. You have to do both. Remember I talked about the votes. Okay? Here's the key. Now, this is going to answer a lot of questions, and pay attention to this part of it. When you split a state, there has to be transition committees. That will be part of the legislation. So, for example, how do we transition our judiciary if we want to? Okay? How do we transfer and transition our taxes? How are they apportioned? How does it break up? How do we transfer and transition the institutions of government that we want to keep? That's all part and parcel of that committee structure that is put into a bill to split the state. That's how it would be done. It would not, I can't tell you what all those details would be because that would be decided into the future. What I can tell you is, I believe we can start now with a committee headed by one of the foremost experts in the entire country on state constitutions, Mark Hurd, and start drafting one now, get one drafted, and then put it up for everybody to take a look at and comment on ahead of time. Because you know what that helps us do? That helps us imagine what freedom looks like. It helps us imagine what we can have in our generation. On top of that, I believe if we don't get the ability to have a hearing on some of these things, that we can do an initiative to the people and bring it to them directly. Either way, imagine a state where you never have to worry about the right to bear arms when the legislature is in session. You don't have to worry about your wallet when legislature is in session. You don't have to worry about your sheep or your cows getting eaten by wolves when the legislature is in session. You don't have to worry about transferring that property to your sons and daughters and paying taxes on it so badly that you might lose it. You don't have to worry about the unborn being protected. You don't have to worry that your state is prepared for cyber attacks or for EMP or whatever else anybody could cook up, or maybe a Mount St. Helens blowing up or a mudslide or anything, that's already taken care of ahead of time. Imagine what freedom could look like. That's why this is so important, because it honestly doesn't matter if we have a state right now or not. Wherever that flag of liberty flies, that's where liberty is. It should be a state of mind for all of us, everywhere we are. Imagine a state where our businesses are innocent until proven guilty and not the other way around. Imagine a state that allows the proper management of our minerals and our forests and respects our water rights, and we don't have to worry about whether the well we dug is going to be legal or not. Imagine a state where education means education and not indoctrination. Imagine a state when a vote comes in that I know that that election had integrity, that I know that everybody that showed up to vote was a citizen of the United States of America and a resident of Washington State? No, a resident of Liberty State. Imagine, just imagine. I think we've lost what freedom really truly looks like. So I want to describe the flag for you. This was voted on by over 1,000 people. The osprey, a symbol for our area, but a symbol of freedom and a symbol of fighting the tyranny of downtown Seattle. The 3 stars above, resiliency, opportunity, rule of law. And I want to say something. We do not live in a democracy. We live in a republic. Why is that important? Because it doesn't matter if 51% of the people have the majority of the vote. They can never take away my rights. It doesn't matter what the color of my skin is. It doesn't matter what my ideology is. It doesn't matter how I worship God. You cannot take away my rights. That's the difference. That's why we are allowed and required to have a Republican form of government at the state level. Now again, here's one of the leading state seals. Please vote on this. I believe that we all want family, God, freedom, faith, and peace. You're never going to guess who created this. This actually was put out by the Socialist Review, so I decided to use it. I was like, you guys did something right finally. 10 years it took you, but you did something. So I want to end with something that I call Wolverine leadership, and we'll take some questions, okay? And again, some of the details, they can't be known until we get those transition committees in place. We can't, it seems like we get a problem that comes up, and then we get ready, we get fired up, we go take care of it. We have got to remain stirred up. We have to remain in the fight for as long as it takes. We can't just get involved and then go home. Now, it's interesting. Wolverines teach us a lot. They've studied Wolverines, they've tagged them and tracked them, and it's interesting that Wolverines always run 3 miles an hour. Uphill, downhill, snow, dry land, rain, mud, doesn't matter. 3 miles an hour. In fact, they tracked a Wolverine going up 4,500 vertical feet at 3 miles an hour. That's got to be a tired Wolverine when that Wolverine got to the top. But it's 3 miles an hour. That's the steady perseverance we need. Stay in this for the long time, because liberty as a state, this solves all of the problems that we always talk about. This is the solution. Not to try to fix a broken paradigm in downtown Seattle, but to create our own new paradigm of freedom that can then be a beacon to everybody else in the world. Amen. Wolverines are also awesome because they teach us self-sufficiency. In the wintertime, a Wolverine will dig down. In fact, some languages are actually translated as bone crushers. They'll dig down 12, 14 feet in an avalanche to get a carcass of an animal that's been buried in the avalanche in the winter to eat and live and survive. I don't want to have to rely on the good beneficence of downtown Seattle for anything. I want to be self-sufficient. Wolverines also teach us a lot about parenthood. Wolverines, the Wolverine father in particular, will go around to each one of its pups and spend exactly the same amount of time with each pup. Do you have a young person in your life you're mentoring right now on freedom and liberty? And for those of you that are giving me kind of the, well, you don't know my son. Good night. That boy, I don't know if he's ever going to grow up. No. Pick somebody in your life. There's many young people. Pick a young person in your life and mentor them. That's how we pass on freedom to the next generation. True freedom. True freedom. Then last, proper attitude. Wolverines are awesome in this respect. They're actually really, really playful animals. There's videos of them online. They actually are playing fetch, kind of like a dog. And you can't really imagine a Wolverine doing that unless you've seen it, so go take a look at them online. But Wolverines are really playful animals, but here's the great part about a Wolverine. If you attack a Wolverine's family, it will rip your face off. Now, how many times have our family, have our property, have our fundamental rights been attacked, and we haven't done a darn thing? We need to. So, concluding the presentation.